You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
Welcome back to the Getting Lit podcast. Last episode, we would have talked about, I think I've pre-recorded all these, so I don't know which order to go in. I think we would have talked about Yellowface by R.F. Kuang.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is what we'll do. I'll redo that.
That's a really
intro.
nice transition to the Cloud Atlas movie.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yes. I love it though. But yeah, and this episode we are talking about Cloud Atlas, the novel by David Mitchell, as well as the film adaptation by Tom Twyker and the Wachowskis. And to join me on this journey is one of the hosts of the Mangaroos podcasts and a really great writer, Jayson Young. Welcome, Jayson.
Thank you, Matt. That's a lovely intro. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I just want to say off the top, is there a podcast with a better name than Getting Lit? It's got to be top 5, right? In terms of podcast names.
Well, you know what's funny is that there are other podcasts, like literature podcasts, that have that name.
No, there aren't. There's only this one.
Well, according to Google, that's true now because, like, I've actually defeated them. Yes. I've defeated them in the search. But
rightfully so.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. It's such a good title. You know, funny enough, if you can believe this, there was some YouTube channel called Mangaroos.
Really?
Before we started our podcast, which we could not believe either. And it was like this husband and wife language teaching pair in like some country. I'm going to mess it up, so I won't say. But that became our goal for like the first several episodes. We were just like, we just got to get ahead of these guys. And once we did that, it's like everything else is gravy. But yeah. I love the name, Getting Lit. I love the show. I've listened to a bunch of episodes, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can't even remember how we made this happen. I think I was just like Cloud Atlas in the agitated Discord or something. And You were like, yeah.
I was like, that's my favorite novel.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so I got you on as well because you're something of an expert on David Mitchell. I've actually only read 2 of his novels, but we'll talk about that later. Cool. Tell me about or Mangaroos pill my audience. Like, why should they listen to that podcast? Why should they read manga as well? Because I'm a little bit hesitant with manga. I've read a couple, but I don't know, something about them. I like anime, but manga is a little bit like, there's just so many. Like, and I don't mean I don't mean like so many as in many different ones, but like the volumes. Like, I went to the Nerd Shop, which is a shop in Melbourne called Minotaur, which like has lots of
that's
crazy...
the nerdiest name for a show.
Yeah.
Wow.
Has like science fiction, like there's a wall of Funko Pops, so that paints the picture, right?
Yep.
But there's also multiple walls of manga, and like I looked at the big ones like Berserk or Gantz or things like that, and it's just like so many volumes, and I'm like,
it's like 30 volumes plus.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I've got so much shit to read already. Like I don't know if I can commit to this form. Tell me why I should.
Ask, Matt. Okay, so you're asking me to sell you not only on a podcast but on an entire art form. All right, Let me see if I'm up to the test.
Do a tight 5 on that.
Here's the reason that I love manga. So first and foremost, I mean, my first love is literature, right? And then at some point I became really interested in comics. For me, the reason I love comic books and specifically manga is it's like this happy middle ground between, the way literature demands that you engage your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing thing about novels and about fiction writing is that nothing happens unless you, the reader, invest your energy into it. Movies, you press play on a movie, it's going to play start to finish regardless. You can dip in, dip out. and most of the heavy lifting is done for you with a movie. It's all right there. It's the vision that the director wants you to see. But with a novel, it's the vision that you see for yourself based on the prompts that the novelist has given you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about manga is it's like somewhere in between. So you get the visual suggestions of a really talented artist, and then in the best case scenario, you get a well-told story as well. And it's just enough suggestion that your imagination has to fill in those gaps. But it's like, you're watching any movie, there are certain scenes or there's certain visuals where you're like, that's the coolest shit I've ever seen. And maybe that's one or two scenes in the movie, and then in between those scenes, there's like a bunch of other stuff that happens. But with a really good manga, it's just like every page is those really striking visual moments. But they're there for you. They're static, so you can just hang out with them for as long as you want.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I love manga I love a lot of Western comics too, don't get me wrong, but manga just can tell stories in any kind of genre. And you get some weird shit that you wouldn't get in movies because movies cost so much to make these days, even so-called independent movies, if people are still even making those, I don't know. But like manga goes places. And because of the length, you really get to see, like if you're talking about a series that has like 30 volumes, let's say, right? That's probably like a decade of storytelling right there.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of manga series will start out in one place in terms of the story that's being told, and then end up somewhere completely different. So
They're kind of like soap operas when they go on that long, right?
That's kind of an unflattering, but yes.
No, it's not unflattering. I think soap operas are great, but
if you love soap opera, then absolutely. Imagine your favorite soap opera, but with extremely beautiful black and white art.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like, for me, it's exciting to see how, I tend to favor manga that's written and drawn by the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's two people doing the two jobs, but you get to see the growth and like the weird tangents and the creative pathways that someone will take over a 5-10 year period, sometimes 20 years, right? There's something fascinating about that. I don't think you can get that in any other art form, even in Western comics. Like, look at Incredible Hulk or Spider-Man or something. It'll be different creative teams every couple of years. And the story will keep resetting back to like some kind of status quo. That doesn't happen with manga.
Is there something about the learning in public aspect of it as well? Like someone who might be a really good artist, but hasn't really written much before. Mm-hmm. And it sort of starts out a bit shaky because they can't really write, but then like maybe it improves slightly. Is that a kind of appealing part of it as well?
We do see that happen sometimes, especially if it's someone's first published work.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, what's a good example of that? I'm just thinking about, so like Shirahama Sensei, who does, what's it called in English? Witch Hat Atelier. Like her first series was just gorgeous artwork, but it was like each page was just like this one gorgeous piece of art, and the storytelling was kind of like not quite there yet. And then in her next series, the storytelling suddenly becomes much stronger, and it gets stronger over the course of the series. So what you're describing, I think, tends to happen with like younger mangaka, like earlier in their career, and then as they get older, they sort of maybe settle into a groove. Or, I mean, it's similar to publishing in the sense that if we're talking about commercial manga, it gets to the point where editors really can't tell them shit. If they're popular enough, it's like they're just going to do what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. But it's like publishing in the sense that there's independent manga, there's like small press manga, there's the big manga that's really, really almost corporate in terms of its like, merchandising tie-ins and everything. So it's just a whole other form of storytelling. And once you learn the language of it, it's like, how did I ever live without this in my diet? You know what I mean? Like, for me, novels are always going to be a part of my life, but I could I could live without movies if I had to, but manga is something special. I think you can tell stories in that form that you can't tell anywhere else.
And this is
So
why you host a podcast on them.
I just think it's great. I love it. But so the reason Mangaroos is unique compared to other manga podcasts, as far as I know, is the three of us read the manga in Japanese and then we talk about it in English. Because we've all been living in Japan for a long time. We've all had careers and we've worked in localization. And so we know some of the cultural stuff that's going on. So that exposes us to, obviously, series that are popular worldwide. We can take like kind of a slightly different look at it, but it also opens up manga that hasn't been localized yet for whatever reason. We're still able to read that and talk about that. So,
For listeners, what does localized mean? Does that just mean translated, or?
It means translated well. Translated just means, taking the literal meaning from one language to another language. Localized is when you take the essence, or you take the intended meaning of what the author was trying to put across, and then you change as much as you need to change in order for it to land the same way in a different language, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, using idioms and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mapping
like
that stuff onto different cultures. And
if you try to imagine translating a joke from one language to another language, it's not going to make sense, right? But so you got to come up with a completely different joke that like captures the spirit of the character or the situation or whatever it is. So yeah, exactly. It's finding the right idiom, finding the right, rhythm for the different characters. Yeah.
So how did this come about, though, this podcast?
Oh, well, Mark and I worked together, and we had sort of similar backgrounds in Japan. Like we had done localization work mostly in games, and we ended up working at the same company. He brought me on board, actually. So shout out to Mark, fellow Mangaroo. And it just came to the forefront that we both love manga. I kind of brought a manga to work one day, or maybe no, that's what it was. He came to work one day with a manga in his pocket of his coat, just sticking out of his coat, almost ostentatious, like he wanted you to see it. But what I had already loved about Mark was he came to work on the train reading a paperback novel. Now, if you've ever been on the train in Japan, it's every single person is either staring at their phone or they're asleep. So to see someone reading a paper book, that's a special thing. And it's something that I would occasionally do. And if I'm not reading a book, then I'm reading my Kobo, right? Which is like a Kindle. So to find out that I work with this guy who's also reading books, and then one day he comes with a manga, and I was like, what's this manga you're reading? And I think might have been Kimetsu no Yaiba. It might have been Demon Slayer at that point. I'm not sure. But we got to talking about it. And then one day I read Chainsaw Man. I was like, have you read Chainsaw Man? And he said, no, I haven't. And Chainsaw Man kind of broke something in my brain, to be honest with you. Like, I never had seen the spirit of punk rock distilled into a manga form before. I think that manga is doing something really special within the constraints of like typical Shonen Jump storytelling. I made him read it. And then we both ended up binging the whole series up to that point, talking about it. And he said, we should make a podcast about this. And I always was like, Mark, we're the only two 30-something-year-old white guys that don't have a podcast. Don't you think that's kind of a point of pride? Shouldn't we kind of keep it that way? And he's like, I see your point, but I think we should really try this. And then what really made it happen was he recommended his friend Alex, who he had worked with before. And Alex is just incredible. I've never met anyone like her. The way she thinks about the world, the way she expresses ideas, she's hilarious. So when the three of us came together, it just felt right. And what's cool about it is we all have very different tastes. So each week, one of us picks which book we're going to read. And thanks to the two of them, I've ended up reading stuff that I would never have read on my own. And we get to talking about it, and we don't always like the same things, but we always have good conversations about it. And through that, I've learned more about the manga creation process and what makes a good manga and what makes good storytelling. And it's just been such a rewarding thing to meet with the same people every week and to talk about a new book each week. You can't do that with a book club because book clubs books take a long time to read. Manga you could read in like a night, talk about it with your friends. It's great.
Yeah. Maybe I should do some manga.
Hey, if you ever, I'm the guy to ask, if you want some recommendations.
It'd just be good for the timetable, like not having to read a novel in a week.
Yes.
Especially this one. This one killed me. Like I'd read it before, so like I was skimming a few pages, but like,
me too.
it is a 500 plus page novel. So, but anyway,
it is a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, really great podcast. How'd you come up with the name? Because I feel like the name is culturally appropriating Australian culture. So what's going on with that? My culture is not your costume, Jayson.
That's amazing. I a fellow Australian of yours, I used to work with him, and he used to get mad at something about in Japan, Santa Claus would be like, no, Australian Santa Claus goes water skiing or something. Help me out.
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah,
I might be veering into more.
He's got kangaroos that instead of reindeer.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're not like this is not one of those drop bear situations, is it? You're not like.
Well, no. So we have the same Santa Claus mythos, so to speak.
Okay. The extended Santa universe.
The reindeer, Rudolph, and all that. But there's also like a parallel thing where instead of reindeer, they just put kangaroos in front of his sled, which doesn't even make sense because like,
no, it doesn't.
Yeah, you're putting kangaroos in there, but like, why would he have a sled?
That's a great point. What would be a more appropriate mode of travel to be led by a bunch of kangaroos? Like a pogo stick? I don't even know.
I don't know either. Like no kangaroos.
No, that's your first mistake.
Yeah. A Land Rover. That would be Australian Santa Claus.
That's actually kind of badass.
Yeah.
For some reason, my image of Australian Santa is like his sleeves are ripped off and he's just like got sunglasses on.
It's just Chris Hemsworth.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The name came from, we brainstormed a bunch of names and Mark said, we were brainstorming via text, right?
Mm.
So the word Mangaroos showed up on my screen and I was like, I love it. I love it because it fucks you up, because when you read it, you think it should be read as Mangaroos, but nobody says manga. So it's like, it's hard. It's stupid to try and explain, but something about that appealed to me. Like when you say it, you have to say Mangaroos, but when you read it, it looks like Mangaroos. And then Alex did the art of us in a kangaroo pouch. And I was just like, well, that's it then. That's it. We just got to go with that. Thank you.
I love it.
I love it too.
Yeah, really good podcast. Go check it out. What have you done? What was your latest episode on? Which
that we put out or that we recorded?
Oh, do you want to do a spoiler?
Yeah, you know what? For
this will be out in like many weeks later.
Yeah, but that's same with us. So the one we just published today was about actually my favorite current ongoing series, which is called Witch Watch. And then the one we recorded most recently, the one we recorded was about Evil Volume 1 by Kaneko Atsushi, and that's a badass manga. I actually posted a video about it in the Agitator Discord, so you may have seen it. But very excited for that episode to come out. That's a really cool manga. I don't know if it's out in English, but it should be at some point because people would like it for sure, I think.
Why is it cool? What's its vibe? What's its genre?
Its vibe is Sonic Youth crossed with American deconstructionalist superhero, anti-superhero storytelling through a Japanese lens / xenophobia sucks. So, and also you can't trust the government.
Xenophobia sucks from Japan. How interesting.
Right? We'll leave that one on the table. But like Kaneko Atsushi is beloved in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
especially in France and in Germany. So I think that tells you a lot about the type of shit that he puts out. Not as beloved in Japan, but like very much beloved by like hardcore indie manga people. It's like, if you've ever seen like the American comic Ghost World,
Mm-hmm.
it looks a lot like that type of art. It doesn't look like
cool.
typical manga. It's very cool. Yeah. Like very stark black and white, harsh artwork, but good storytelling. It's good stuff.
Yeah, cool. Speaking of good storytelling, one thing that you've done that I really appreciate is on your Substack, you've been doing these monthly. Are they monthly? They are, aren't they? Essays on Cormac McCarthy's work. So
Yeah.
he all up did publish 12 novels, right? And so you're doing one for each month this year.
Yeah.
So the last one is due soon. It is now December for us anyway.
Yep. It's currently December. Well, maybe I shouldn't say. Leave some illusion.
Yeah.
It is December.
Yeah. So, and so the last essay in this series will be on Stella Maris, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have
you read it?
No, I haven't. I actually haven't read much of his work. I've read Blood Meridian, and I read that for the first time for this show, like a couple of months ago. And I've read The Road, and I've read No Country, and that's basically all I've read. But I need to go back and read all of them.
I don't know if you necessarily need to read all of them, is what I've found out.
I will, though. I'm a completionist.
Yeah, I feel you. By the way, thank you for the shout out. I've had a lot of fun with the project, and the feedback has been fantastic. Like, I can't believe the way it's been resonating with people.
I think because it's so personal. Like it's not they're not like book reviews, so to speak. They're more like you bring your own kind of life experience into it. And sort of like I was saying before we started recording, like I'm trying to do here is like sort of talking around and about the book, like kind of being able to sort of circle in and out of it, you know. That's the best way to talk about art, I think.
I completely agree. And Kelby Losak said something similar. And I think I agree with you that it is the best way to talk about art, but specifically novels, because reading a novel is such a personal, intimate act, right? Like, and we talk about it on Mangaroos sometimes, but like if I'm reading something on the train, that train ride is going to impact the experience I have with the book versus, you know, I've had like amazing reading experiences. Like you come out of the onsen, you come out of the hot springs and you're in the relaxed lounge area just outside. Whatever you're reading in that atmosphere is going to seem way more enjoyable to you than it really is, right? So any book review that attempts to ignore what's going on in the person's life when they read that book is disingenuous, because if you are having a shitty week and you're reading this book, that's going to impact what you read. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are. I don't, you know. So I tried to, you know, especially with someone like McCarthy, who is such a introspective and like prickly kind of difficult writer. And we assume that he's putting himself into the narrative to some extent. We don't know if he really is or not, but I wanted to try and meet him on that level of just like, here's where I'm at when I'm engaging with these stories. And if that's coming across in the stuff that I'm writing about them, then that's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. But Stella Maris is going to be emotional because it is the last one. And, you know, The Passenger and Stella Maris, that combo is really the whole reason I started this project in the first place, because like you, I had read The Road, you know, however many years ago, 12 years ago, whatever, 15 years ago. And I thought he was done. You know, I didn't expect him to put it. So my friend Josh and I, when we found out that he had published 2 new books last year, we were like, shit, we got to read these. And I was like, well, hey, hang on a second. I don't know if I just want to jump into these new ones. I think for some reason I was like, I want to go back and read the old, because I haven't read all of the old stuff. So this guy's not going to be around too much longer. And, I hate to say that because like he did pass away this year, but yeah, it just felt appropriate. And it's been an incredible experience because you're talking about work that started in the 1960s and finished in the 2020s. And to hear, it's similar to what I was saying about manga, actually. To hear the same voice, well, that's not right, the same writer, reflect upon the state of the world over that span of time. You don't get that opportunity all that often, especially someone of his talent. So I don't always like the stories that he's telling, but his talent is unbelievable.
Yeah, I think his like there's a lot of Cormac McCarthy contrarians, or there were before he died, some after he died too, which I always think is so tasteless. But anyway, but the one thing I will give these people is that where are the laughs? Like I need some humor, like
pretty grim.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think he's a great writer.
I want to say, and E. Rathke, another Broken River alumnus, he agrees with me on this, but McCarthy doesn't get enough credit for how funny he actually is. Not in Blood Meridian and not in The Road. I will give you, those ones are just pitch black.
Actually, I find The Judge pretty funny in some scenes.
Okay, all right, there you go.
Yeah.
Especially if you go back to some of his early stuff like Suttree or even Outer Dark.
I've heard Suttree is the funniest one.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some, not really. I was going to say there's some funny stuff in The Passenger, but there actually isn't. There's attempts, I think. And the what's it called? The Border trilogy, All the Pretty Horses. Those ones have some funny stuff in them, but it's not like comedy style, like pratfalls, like look at this great joke. It's just like it's dialogue that feels real. Whereas if you were sitting around with the guys shooting the shit in those scenes, you would be laughing. So if you can pick up on that vibe, it is funny. I'm sure he would be a great guy to hang out with if he was still around. I'm sure he's got some funny stories to tell. So it's that kind of humor.
Other than the like science worship, yeah, he'd probably be fun.
God, yeah, and that comes across in the
the less said about that,
complicated individual. Yeah. There's a lot going on.
All right. Speaking about, let's get into the author we're talking about today. So at the top of the episode, maybe even before we started recording, you mentioned that David Mitchell is your favorite novelist. So how did that come about, and where did that, or one of your favorite novelists?
Yeah. At one point in time, when I was younger, I would have said that David Mitchell is my favorite novelist. And that came, so I had actually read his first two novels before Cloud Atlas came out. For whatever reason, I took them out of the library. So I can't remember which one came first. There's Ghost Written and there's Number 9 Dream. And I had read both of those. And they either were nominated or they won some awards. I don't know. But what was really cool about them is they were essentially like collections of short stories, but they kind of bled into each other. And I was like, I don't know, 17, 18 years old at that time. I'd never read anything like that. And they felt like very of that time. They felt like stories that were happening at that year. You know what I mean? Like this was before the internet it was what it is now. So like music videos on TV were like an important part of the culture and all that. And I just felt like that his first books were like an extension of that. And then Cloud Atlas came out and it became a huge deal, became like really word of mouth popular. And it was like those first two books, but like the grown up version. It's like he got serious. He was like, I know how to kind of link stories together, but let me do something much bigger with that idea. And he's just such a talented writer that I my mind was blown when I read it. I read it when I was like 19 or 20 years old. I don't know. And, at that point I was reading like, I don't know, like magical realism, Latin American stuff. Like I had just gotten out of
Abuelas and magical tortillas. That
it's
sort
that
of
whole
stuff.
subgenre.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, like fantasy shit and like Stephen King always has been part of my life and whatnot. And then I was discovering Japanese literature at that point in time as well. And so Cloud Atlas appeared to be like this very, I don't know, like at that point in my life, it seemed to like encompass the whole world and like all of time and history and everything. And it was just like, this writer is doing something I've never seen any other writer do. And frankly, I've never seen anyone do it since either.
No, and it does really encompass the world, like this book especially.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's really appealing, in the two books I've read of his.
So the other one you've read is The Bone Clocks?
That's right. Yeah, which is even bigger than Cloud Atlas and even more, well, I wouldn't say it's more ambitious, but it's pretty fucking ambitious, but like
really?
It has that same sense of bigness, overwhelming kind of like sublimity that is also, it's sublime and big and huge, but it's also about the quotidian and the minuscule and the very, very petty and human as well, which I think that's a balance that he strikes really well, particularly in Cloud Atlas, but he does that in the Bone Clocks as well.
It's a great point.
But the one thing that I really respect about him from a writer's point of view is that he has a command of like vastly different voices, like in the same thing, even if he's writing a story that is, ostensible. Cloud Atlas is different because it's like several different periods or genres and things like that are connected, which I'll explain in a bit. But something like the Bone Clocks is more, it's more about perspective. And so it's like the way he changes between them, while it not seeming choppy, is just really masterful, the way he kind of pulls that off.
Yeah, I don't want to say that he's a chameleon because that sounds cheap, but just to give you an example, like for a while I would say, and what I mean is like I would tell people when they would say, "What's your favorite novel?" For many years I would say it was Cloud Atlas. But David Mitchell didn't really become one of my favorite writers until 2 books after that. So his next book after Cloud Atlas was Black Swan Green, which was kind of a flop in terms of sales because it just tells the story of a little boy in like 1980s England. And it's very much just like a mundane one point of view story. And I loved it. And it's completely different from Cloud Atlas. And then his next book after that was the Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, right? And that's the one that really clinched it for me because at that point I had just gone to live in Japan for the first time. And I found out that David Mitchell lived in Japan for 8 years. And that story is all about one of the first Dutch not settlers, but like one of the first Dutch tradespeople that ever came to live in Japan. So it's this whole reflection of like what it means to be a white person in Japan and to like start questioning your identity and what that all means and stuff. And meanwhile, I was having that exact same experience for myself, living in this rural nowhere area in Japan. So it was a combination of all of those things that made me really appreciate what he's doing because, yeah, like you said, like in the context of one book, he can capture so many different voices and time periods and parts of the world. But then when he wants to, he can write an entire book from one really convincing point of view. And that can be 1980s England, or it can be like, the 1800s Dutch tradespeople in Japan. So, and to pull those off equally convincingly, that's really impressive to me.
And I feel like there used to be more novelists who could do this, that that, and not necessarily in the same way, obviously. He's his own kind of writer and has his own concerns, but it seems to me that like most novelists now can't feel like politically they can't access alternate voices. It always has to be through the lens of the autobiographical or the thinly veiled autobiographical. And I feel like this is it's such a diminishment of what you can do in a novel, that magical like opening up of the world that you can do with like a really big novel. And I feel like novelists don't have that sense of scale anymore. And I think he's one of the ones that does, obviously, but he used to have things like that were a little bit more ambitious. And where has that gone? That's what I want to know.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think where it's gone is it's like authors that are working with that sense of scale now, they apply it to completely fantasy worlds. Like they build their own lore and they apply it to worlds that you and I have never experienced. So it feels kind of trivial by comparison. What's really amazing about Mitchell is all of his books take place in what very much feels like the real world. So he's dabbling in contemporary time periods. He goes back in the past. And because of that, and because those stories feel so grounded and feel so real, then in Cloud Atlas, when he starts looking toward the future, that feels compelling because we know he has such a good handle on what's come before and where we're at now that, you want to go with him on that journey to what he sees the future to be. It just takes on that gravity that if you're just making everything up out of whole cloth, it doesn't have that same, like, that sense of like, I need to pay attention to this, or like these ideas are important.
Yeah, it's a little bit more diaphanous. You can't it's not like meaty. You can't grab onto it,
Right.
Yeah. So the novel is, like you said, a series of stories that are sort of connected together.
It's a sextet.
It's a sextet. It is. So basically what happens is that you start with one narrative that then is nested into the next. So we start with the journal of is it Robert Ewing? I think
Adam
it is.
Ewing.
Adam Ewing. Yeah. And he's sort of like an American lawyer in the Pacific, in the Chatham Islands, and has a sort of journey, and it's his journal. That journal is then found by a character in the next story, which is Frobisher, who is a budding composer, who goes to be an amanuensis for an older composer. That narrative is told through letters to his lover back in England. Those letters are discovered by the next in the next story, which is the Louisa Ray mysteries, which is sort of like a mystery, not a novel story about like oil companies and energy and nuclear power and stuff like that. And basically, like after her investigation is a sort of extended chase sequence, it's cool though. And then that is something that is read into the next narrative, which is Cavendish, I think.
The ghastly ordeal of Timothy Cavendish.
Yeah, which is actually one of my favorite stories, but it's hilarious.
It's definitely my favorite story. Yeah.
So that the manuscript for Louisa Ray's mystery kind of adventure is sent to his vanity press that he runs. And then his narrative is turned into a movie, which is watched in the next kind of narrative by Son Mi, who is a kind of like a replicant clone kind of server who starts a revolution by becoming independent thinking. And then Son Mi's sort of prayer or orison, as it's called, like a recording of her message to humanity, is then kind of sort of turned into a religion in the far future after the fall kind of society. But what's different about this is that those 6 stories then sort of recur in a sort of backwards motion. So we go forward from Ewing and so on and so on, like I described. And then that end story, which is the middle. Does it sound confusing?
With me so far?
Yeah. Sort of, that is probably the longest story, that middle story. And then then the story comes backwards from that. So we go from the future, and then back to Sonmi, then back to Cavendish, then back to Louisa Ray, and then back to Frobisher, and then back to Ewing. And so,
and what's crazy is when we get to Ewing, it's actually literally mid-sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
Like his story actually just picks up like hundreds of pages later.
Yeah. That's a thing to keep in mind as well, is that, the most of the kind of narratives just stop and then it's picked up later. And that's an interesting part of this novel. A lot of people, I love, just because it's really cheap, good content, I love going on Goodreads and seeing people like misapprehend things.
Yes.
And so lots of people hate this structure.
Really?
I think it's amazing. I think it's great because, people have done the whole handoff, nested story thing before. Like you said, it's a common thing, like, a sort of a novel in short stories, for instance. But the difference is that he doesn't just connect them in the sense of like, one character might be featured in another one or something like that, some like tenuous connection. Like they are literally sort of nested within each story, like a Matryoshka doll. So, and this is saying something, I think, in terms of the thematics of the novel, but lots of people didn't complained about this. And I think the hurdle for a lot of people is probably the choice of the story order. Because the first, I'm sorry, I don't know if you like this, but the first narrative is so boring. Like
it's super boring. Yeah.
The rest of them are way more interesting, and but then his narrative becomes more interesting the second time around when you return to it at the end.
That's the thing, because you have all this insight gained from all the other stories. I agree that, okay, so let me say this. My memory of Cloud Atlas from almost 20 years ago now was like incredible structure. The structure is mind-blowing.
Yeah, but we're writers.
Right. But then, so I rarely return to books. Like there's so many books to read. It's rare that I'll read the same one again, but coming back to this, I was prepared for that. What I was not prepared for was how fucking clever Mitchell is in the way he'll give you the obvious, like the nested stories, and like there's very obvious connections between the different stories, but there's all these like little subtle recurring themes or like little references that are kind of veiled and not quite clear, that you really have to be paying attention to notice them, so that when you come back around to those stories the second time, you're understanding these characters and their motivations in a completely different way. But I agree with you that first one is definitely the most boring. However, I do think it had some really nice, like the way it's written is very clever and cute. And I'm trying to think, like there's some turns of phrase that are very much like 1800s explorer type man, like he says, "Into virgin forest so rotted, knotted, and tangled, I was obliged to clamber aloft like an orangutan," with an exclamation point and with a dash in between orang and utan. Like it's this. So it's just, here's why I was resistant at first when you suggested watching the movie. For me, so much of the pleasure of Cloud Atlas is not the stories themselves. Because let's be honest, like, you have 6 novellas here that are linked together. If you're being honest, Matt, would you say that any of these individual novellas are really great? Like, if you took them on their own?
Not really. No,
right?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, why does this need a movie adaptation? Because the real pleasure of Cloud Atlas is the wordplay and the use of language and the way Mitchell uses language completely differently across these 6 different time periods. Like the far future story.
Oh, people hate that too. People hate
because of the way it's written.
Yeah, because of the language, like the kind of like futuristic patois. Like people, I didn't understand it, and like how could it's not that hard. Like you just got to get used to the rhythm of it, you know. And
I don't think it's hard to understand, but it is. So one thing I will say is David Mitchell should have learned one thing from Cormac McCarthy, which is you do not need apostrophes at the end of every single word, David Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
But so the other thing that happens with each of these stories is they're structured very differently, which for me led to reading each of them very differently. So like the Louisa Wright chapter is like, it's a mystery novel from the 70s. So each chapter is like 2 or 3 pages long.
Yeah.
Which means it's beautiful because I'll read like one chapter, put it down, come back to it later. Like it's very staccato, right? But with the far future thing, my reading speed went way down.
Yeah.
And I had to like muddle through this. Like, so it's not that I can't understand it, but like the cadence of it is so unlike anything it almost felt like reading like a medieval English text or like something in a language that I only kind of understand. Really fascinating experience to feel that.
That's a really good point. Like the way, the language, definitely what he does with language. I do want to talk about that more. But one thing I would say as well is that with that future chapter, I think so much of this book is about the way we conceptualize time and history. And it's almost like the future is being remembered rather than like extrapolated or imagined. So, and I think he does again, speaks to his cleverness, is that reading that future chapter, you know, the far future chapter with Zachary and the people in Hawaii, the cannibals and stuff, that the way that reads is, like you said, like Middle English or something like that. It makes it feel old timey, even though it's in the future.
Yeah.
And so I feel that gets to his whole concept of time in this novel, which I think in another story he refers to. I think it's Cavendish who refers to time not as an arrow, not as a boomerang, but as a concertina. So, you know, something that like, you know, folds in on itself and folds out. And, so I think maybe something like that is happening with language, is that he's talking about recurrence and remembrance and how even the future is something that we kind of don't necessarily imagine, but remember from our particular point in time. You know, that's just a weird philosophical thing that I thought was interesting about it.
It's hard not to sound extremely stoned when we're talking about that, but I agree with, like, it's not as if he's saying that time is circular. Yeah. It's well, in your case it's illegal where I am, but it's like, it's not like time is circular, but it's definitely it's very much like weaving in and out of past and future and present. But the other thing that kind of fucked me up this time on this reread was like the conventions of storytelling, which I had never considered on my first read. But you think about like the first chapter is like a travel log. And then the second chapter is a series of letters. And the third chapter is a novel. And then the Cavendish chapter becomes a movie. So it's not clear if we're reading what actually happened or if we're reading the movie.
The treatment.
Right. And then the next to final chapter is like an interview transcript. And then the final chapter is just like verbal storytelling, like oral tradition.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously it's 100% fiction. I understand that. But like within the fiction, to what extent are each of these stories being fictionalized? Like in the context of Cloud Atlas, did any of this shit actually happen the way it's being told? Right?
And
I never thought about that on my first read.
Yeah, that's actually, there's a few points in the novel where that is kind of flagged. I think it's in Frobish's chapter where he talks about the journal sounding kind of made up. It's like it's like a throwaway line, but he says like, it sounds a bit unconvincing to me, like he just sort of embellished, or it might even be an attempt at fiction or something like that. And there's other moments as well where people are like, for instance, with Louisa Ray, it's like, so is this a novel in the world of the story, or is this something that happened to her?
That's the most unclear.
That she's dramatized.
Like, does Louisa Ray, the person, even exist at all? Or is she just a character in this novel? Because in the Cavendish chapter, it's revealed that the writer of the Louisa Ray novel is not really Hilary Hush. It's some like slovenly fat guy who's just using that as a pen name. But
many
is that
such cases.
True? Very relatable. But like, we can't trust anything Cavendish says either, because we know that he's kind of making his own story seem more grandiose than it really is. So it's just like that again. It's this layering of reality. Like, what of this story? What is fundamentally true and what isn't? And I think it basically comes down to this message. I mean, what did you think of the very end, like the last page of the novel? Because for me, it's like it's this moralistic message that kind of comes out of nowhere, but also perfectly fits the whole, which is just like, this very grand vision of like, over the course of history, there will be good people and there will be bad people, and the bad people will win, but the good people's hearts will unite all human races across the world. Like, it felt a little bit like try hard to me, but also I kind of loved it.
Yeah, but also it fits with the story it's telling and the genre, so to speak. Exactly. It's that 19th century, like, kind of Melville sort of Defoe kind of extrapolating on various philosophical ideas, but also this oceanic view of humanity is the kind of thematic point of the story. And so this goes back to what you were saying before, is that the stories themselves, they're not that strong individually, but in terms of the overall thematics of it, it hangs together perfectly. Like, because it's like, it's about this message of, humanity being composed of all of these different kinds of people, and that it's weirdly like not negative or positive about humanity. Like, it's way more complicated than that. It's just that we're this great heaving sea that like moves against or with history, or makes history, or just watches on as history happens, or like it's just sort of looking at the diversity of humanity in different kinds of perspectives.
It might just be this gesture you're making with your hands, but I really like this image you've invoked of like, if humanity is the waves crashing against the shore, then history is like, how water has the power to shape a rock over like thousands and thousands of years. It's almost like that. It's not good or bad. It's just like,
yes, Bruce Lee.
Be like water, my friend.
Be like water, my friend. Water can crash, but it can also flow.
Yeah, I feel like it's just infuriatingly, you can't argue with it. That's what Cloud Atlas is infuriating, because it tries a lot of risky things. It doesn't always succeed like page to page or story to story. But when you take it in its entirety, it's just like, God damn it, David Mitchell. you really done something here, and I can't argue with it.
Mm.
It's just,
And it is the message of that he's saying too, that you need to take humanity in its entirety, like warts
right.
and all, you know,
Yep.
like there were people, you know, because part of one reading of the book is that a lot of the characters throughout the stories are like reincarnations of, you know, previous ones, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not really David Mitchell has actually endorsed this reading, but I kind of don't. I feel that's a cop out.
Yeah, I don't find that very satisfying.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
is that? Why does that feel like cheap somehow?
I don't know, but you know, because there's the birthmark and like multiple characters have it and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So,
Yeah, that
but
always felt like kind of shoehorned in there. Like, what is so that's my one. If I want to be critical of the book, I I it's got this great artifice of nested narratives, and it's telling this really interesting kind of meta narrative. But once you actually get to the end of it, so you reach this peak in the middle chapter, which is far in the future, and then you come back down and you decrescendo and you I don't know, you come full circle, whatever. I kind of wanted there to be a little bit more like of an aha, like a really compelling reason why all of these narratives are being linked together. And for some people, it's satisfying enough to just say, well, the past influences the future and the wings of the butterfly, you know, but I wanted there to be just a little bit more of a narrative, like reward, like a little bit more of a payoff. And similarly, like the comet-shaped birthmark, like, yeah, it's there from chapter, but like, what is that doing narratively? Like, apart from just saying, huh, see, these
yeah, yeah.
people are influencing each other's lives. I wanted there to be a little bit more of a something weighty there or something interesting. I don't know.
I think the weightiness for me comes in, yeah, like we were saying before, the overall picture, but also in terms of individual stories. I think it's interesting what he does with genre, in particular, because the hinge point of the story of the novel, because it's not just one story, is the post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
sort of story with Zachary, who lives in the valley of, like, is it the Big Island on Hawaii? I think it is.
Big eye. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, he's visited by this person from the Prescients. See, they're the high tech survivors of the fall. And what I liked about this story actually is, and I think this is something you've written about too, is what it does with the post-apocalypse genre.
Yes.
Because post-apocalyptic fiction tends to be very annoying to me, because it's like, well, the way that it functions socially today is to scare people. But also at the same time, have you ever heard the term cozy catastrophe?
No, what's that? I like it.
This is
What
a
does that
term
mean?
that the science fiction writer Brian Aldiss came up with to describe things like a post-apocalyptic sort of setting where, like, the survivors get to restart society. And
Oh,
it's
so like
like
The Stand. It's the Stand.
yeah, kind of. And it's like, it's this idea of like resetting everything, like
Sure.
resetting everything you don't like about humanity, about human society, about, you know, the good and bad and all that sort of stuff. What David Mitchell does in this story in particular is that he resists that kind of, framing.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually shit that the world ended, like, and it's not great for these people, and it's also not great for the really high tech people. But
No,
it's
it's a
also,
mess.
no more shittier than human life generally. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's also got this positive message of that people will endure. You know?
Yeah. And it also feels earned. It
Yes.
feels really genuine because, again, he ties it into he for me, I didn't really feel like a super strong connection amongst the narratives until that final chapter where we come back to Adam Ewing And he starts talking about how like the choices we make today, if we don't contain this human need for avarice and greed and like who has the bigger guns, eventually what does he say? Like the first will become the last, and the last will be the only ones left. And you really see
the devil will take the hindmost until the hindmost is the foremost.
Thank you. That's much. This is why you're the host of the program. But yeah, like we see that playing out, and it's compelling because it feels so possible. It's not that hard to envision a scenario where the extremely poor peoples of the world are just cordoned off, and they're so excluded from everything else that they just think that they're the only ones left. And then meanwhile, there's like this super advanced race of technology people. Like you can already see the beginnings of that happening in the world we live in today. So, you know,
that guy who's trying to reverse his age. Have you seen that guy?
No, but like I could totally.
He's like an internet meme. Like he's just some like tech bro idiot who is like, I think he's like in his 40s or something, and he's trying to like reverse the aging process and become like 18 again. Right. Like, and he's doing all of these like therapies and like different things.
Remember when guys used to just buy a motorcycle and that was good enough?
Yeah, like, yeah. Comb over blowing in the wind, you know, it's like, you know.
So anyway, I mean, what's crazy to me is that this book was written 20 years ago, and obviously I think the far future chapter feels a lot more successful than like the near future chapter.
Interesting, hey.
It is, right? Because the near future chapter has like all this cloning and like replicant technology, but nobody has an iPhone. So it's always, I think near future is harder to write than far future in terms of convincingness and how well it ages. But in terms of the agencies at work and the trends that humanity is setting up for itself, it's like, I hope we avoid a situation like that. But I guess neither of us will be alive to find out.
Yeah,
unless that guy figures out how to reverse his age.
Yes, yeah. I will be taking the pill, of course, but only I'll only be doing that so I can write more books. That's the only reason why. Yeah. So, So, would you say that the post-apocalyptic story was your favorite out of all of them, or what?
No. My favorite one to read was definitely Timothy Cavendish.
Yeah. It's definitely the funniest. You can just like hear his voice.
Yeah. I can just imagine David Mitchell cackling as he wrote. It's just so indulgent and funny, and it's full of like this puerile humor and like boner jokes, and just it's very gleeful, and it's just preposterous when they escape to the Scottish bar and a brawl breaks. Like it's completely silly. That one's definitely my favorite, which was surprising because I don't remember it being my favorite. Least favorite is unfortunately Louisa Ray. I just think it drags and drags and drags, and it's ultimately not all that consequential, it feels, for the most part. Not that Cavendish is consequential. I don't know. Well, how would you rank them? I think it goes like Cavendish, Louisa Ray, something, something, something. Adam Ewing, probably least favorite.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I think this is a cop-out, but I think it's sort of like, it's hard to rank them because I don't think they're supposed to be taken in isolation. But if I had to...
I'm just obsessed with ranking things.
Yeah, if I had to, I'd rank the far future one highest, probably. That's probably just because I'm a science fiction nerd. The Cavendish next, then the Frobisher one, and then the Louisa Ray, and then what I'm missing, the journal.
Adam Ewing and Sonmi.
Oh, Sonmi, then Adam Ewing, yeah.
Sonmi has so many cool ideas.
So many, yeah. But so many gestures to cool ideas, like by implication as well. But I like that. I like it when it's like that. It's very Gene Wolfe, you know, like... like he manages to create a very convincing world.
Like you understand how that world works by just these bare hints of how fast food restaurants operate or how rich people treat the poor people in that society. But the narrative itself was kind of confusing and like not super, like the characters in that chapter, I don't know. It just didn't really capture my imagination. No, that's not it totally captured my imagination. The through line of it didn't feel as rewarding as some of the others, I guess.
Belief, like fear or love, is a force to be understood as we understand the theory of relativity and principles of uncertainty, phenomena that determine the course of our lives. Yesterday, my life was headed in one direction. Today, it is headed in another. Yesterday, I believed I would never have done what I did today. These forces that often remake time and space, that can shape and alter who we imagine ourselves to be, begin long before we are born and continue after we perish. Our lives and our choices, like quantum trajectories, are understood moment to moment. At each point of intersection, each encounter suggests a new potential direction.
I don't know, like maybe this is a way to segue into the film, but it felt like the film really fleshed out the Sonmi account.
It did in some ways. Yeah, let's talk about the movie. So I'm glad you made me watch the movie because I had resisted watching it for more than a decade, which blew my mind. Holy shit, that movie's more than 10 years old. The movie looks amazing.
It's incredible.
The Wachowskis, when I found out that it was them making the movie adaptation, I was just like, okay, good luck with that, Speed Racer. But no, they were exactly the right choice because they nail the fact that each of the 6 stories should visually have its own visual language. They do that extremely well. But yeah, Neo Soul looks amazing. The use of like really garish, bright primary colors in Neo Soul, not something I would have imagined, but they do it really, really well. That movie introduces some amazing ideas, and it's also got a whole bunch of its own problems.
Well, in terms of, I think it's a masterful adaptation because I don't think following the novel's structure to the T would work in film. It'd just be like, people would just be like, what's this Adam Ewing shit? Like, what?
Yeah.
And
how long would it be? Like, half
it would
an
be
hour?
so late. But like, you watch this film and you don't even need to read the book, but reading the book helps. Reading the book helps to understand how amazing this film is, the way it was put together, because instead of nesting the stories, they sort of like play them in parallel and kind of cut between them. I would say seamlessly. Like the way that they cut between them, I think is like the moments that they choose to do that and then cut back and forth, and like I think the editing is amazing in this film. And it does it in a way that I don't think is very jarring. I think it's it really flows. Like the editing feels like it breathes. So it feels like you get to a scene in a story and you're just like, you take a breath and then into the next story, you release that breath. And I think it's a tension and release thing that they do really well throughout the entire movie. That it's like these, if you imagine like the structure of a film, you know, rising action and stuff like that, it's like all those 6 strands are like kind of following each other, you know, instead of being nested in each other.
I totally agree with you that the nesting structure wouldn't have worked in film, and I just automatically assumed that that's how the film would be. So for me, it was quite, and I just watched the film for the first time today, so I'm still kind of processing it, so you have to forgive me, but I was really amazed by the fact that they smashed all the narratives together. And I'm of two minds about this, because in one sense, that really helped me to pick up on recurring themes in the novel that I hadn't really considered before. Like the way the narratives do sort of parallel one another. Like they all feature escapes, and they all feature one character helplessly selflessly helping another character to later benefit, right? And you don't pick up on that as clearly if you're reading the narratives in these huge chunks. So that was really interesting. I do agree with your point about the editing. I hadn't considered that, but it is very almost musical, which is very true to the original idea of the Cloud Atlas Sextet, which was originally written as 6 instrumental solos that kind of
come together at the end. Yeah.
Come together and weave into one another. So you can tell that everyone involved in the making of this film had a deep passion for the book. But that being said,
understood the book too. That's a crucial
I would say,
point. Yeah.
I was amazed at how many lines of dialogue I recognized from the book, or like scenes taken directly out. But they also made some very interesting narrative choices to make the movie work that didn't happen in the book, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the Frobisher chapter.
Yeah, like bizarre ones in that one. Like you didn't want to film in Belgium? Like, why is it in Edinburgh?
Yeah, for example, and they cut out the whole part about Frobisher's mysterious lover, who turned out to not love him at all in the end. But one thing you said is really interesting, because the whole time I was watching the movie, the one thing I kept thinking was, if I had not read the book, this would not make any fucking sense. Like I could see why this movie was a flop, because it is not an easy movie. It is.
Well, I watched the movie before I read the book. So,
did it hang for you?
Yeah, I loved it. Like I found it was and then I loved it even more after I read the book, because I was just like, this is like a technical and spiritual achievement, like to make this movie. I think
it's an amazing movie. Yeah.
Yeah. The more I watch it, the more I'm convinced it's like pretty close to a masterpiece. Like I think that it was sort of criticized a lot when it first came out. Like it didn't get a great critical reception. And I think a lot of that had to do with the like the weird race stuff, which I don't have a problem
There's some
with.
weird race. Yeah.
I don't care.
I don't either, but people can't get over that shit. So.
Yeah. But yeah, like it is something that does need to be done. Even now I watched it again today. It is something that just invites you to digest it for a bit. And I've seen it like multiple times. But because it's packed full of the similar ideas to the novel. So yeah, the way that the movie works though is that the playfulness of the novel is not so apparent, because like, again, it doesn't have that nested structure, although there are like little connections. Like they make much more of a thing about the birthmark. You do see like a physical copy of the journal. You do see like the letters and things like that, but this is more condenses it into, this is all just one timeline. Whereas the other one felt like these are stories within stories. Like it felt more like in the realm of literature, like in a postmodern sense, whereas this one was more historical,
I think it felt like a cover of a song. I think the Wachowskis took it and made it their own thing, because for me, the movie was very playful, but in different ways. Like, for example, there's almost like cartoonish violence at times that you really don't expect. Like when Tom Hanks throws the guy off the building, they just straight up show him splattering on the concrete. Yeah. Like I was like, holy shit. Or like there's interesting use of drag. Like they have Hugo Weaving play the woman in the nursing home.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Which I was like, he straight up looks like Mrs. Doubtfire, but we're just supposed to accept this. And
and the best part about that is in the bar fight and how he's like laying into
Scottish. He's like slugging this woman. Or like having Duna Bay play the Mexican woman and her.
Yeah, that was really good, actually.
Ooh, I don't know if it was
I
good.
loved that.
I loved it in a way. I didn't love it because it was accurate. You know what I mean? Like, it just almost felt like the movie has this gleeful, like, high school stage production vibe to it. Like, we'll just get everyone to play all of the characters. We only have 5 cast members, so we're just going to have costume changes. And it's, they made some choices, and it's a difficult movie in a sense, because I can't think of another movie that's structured like that. And they don't explain everything to you. It's just, you just got to be along for the ride. And emotionally, it's all over the place.
Oh yeah, I love that though, because the novel's kind of like, I love bizarre tonal shifts. Like,
me too.
But even with that, like, you will have like these tonal shifts. Like, any one of the all of the stories are pretty serious except for Cavendish. So anytime you like cross to Cavendish, it just sort of like, it has this sort of bathos element to it, right? Like, where it kind of undermines. But I love that because I love bizarre tonal shifts. And so
then I can see why you love this movie.
Yes. So like, but even so, there is sort of like an emotional core to the Cavendish story. Even like, it's about, freedom and, expressing yourself and all that sort of shit. So,
well, and there's also this very wistful, like, sentimental exploration of like the loss of youth, right? And like,
yeah,
the one love of my life was like 40 years ago, and I'll never be that same man that I used to be. And also just the visual storytelling of the Wachowskis. Like, the one scene that really jumped out to me was when Halle Berry's car falls off the bridge, but it's shot from inside the car. So you just see like the scenery around her is just turning around in these really unnatural ways. I thought that looked amazing, and I would love to have seen that on a big screen instead of on my laptop. But, it's a lot of movie to take in. It's also 3 hours long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, it is.
Let me ask you this.
What?
2012 versus 2023. If Cloud Atlas was being adapted today, it would be a Netflix series.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Would it work better that way than a 3-hour movie, or is it good the way it is?
Well, it could probably be the same length because, Netflix series are like,
that's true.
Here's 3 20-minute episodes or 8 20-minute episodes. Like,
the same thing.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, how
I think if it had been a series, they probably would have taken the nested narratives approach. I think it would have been like, this episode is Frobisher. You know what I mean? I don't think it would have been that same weird time hopping structure.
Yeah, because the Wachowskis were involved. Did you ever watch Sense8?
No.
So I think I should double check that, but I'm pretty sure the Wachowskis were involved with this series. I think it was on Netflix, called Sense8, which is about these 8 people who are all born at the same time and were like psychically connected. And so it was about, and they were all of different identities. So it was like very 2010s, you had a Mexican guy, gay guy, you had a black woman, you had like a trans chick, like, so it was very that, but it was also like, it did cross cut a lot in a very similar way to this film, like from the different characters. Well, something was going on in one person's life in like a comedic sense. You had something really horrific happen in the next scene or something like that.
And wasn't Duna Bay also in that? I want to say
she was. Yes, she was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I got to watch that. All right.
And they could also like take on the abilities of everyone else in the kind of 8-person cell. So
I feel like that must be based on a graphic novel. This sounds very similar to
it might
something.
Be. Yeah.
I'm gonna Google. I know it's bad etiquette to Google while you're on a podcast, but well, shit. All I'm getting is I'll get back to you on that. But you're right. The Wachowskis were definitely involved in it. Sounds
good. Yeah, but I do think that they probably took what they learned from this movie in terms of the editing, I guess, or maybe they hired the same editor, because I do actually think it works really well. This cross-cutting, like, because I think so much thought went into it. It wasn't just, we've had enough of this story. Let's just cut to the next one. There was a sort of all of the storylines and the transitions, they kind of build into this like natural, almost meditative pattern.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, because you'll get a scene in one of the narratives that's like a full 3-minute scene with multiple camera angles, and you follow the characters through these motions, and then it'll cut to one of the other timelines for like 5 seconds, and then it'll just cut somewhere else. So like it is organic, and I like your word breathing for it. Like it transitions to a different narrative when it needs to. It's not like constrained. But comparatively, you could say the book is almost constrained, because it's like we've set up this pattern where like I've devoted this number of pages to this story, so it has to be like, a similar amount. And I love the line in the novel where, I can't remember if it's Frobisher, I think it is, where he says like, is it genius? Is it just a hackneyed trick? Who knows? But I've come this far, so there's no going back now.
Yeah.
And it's just Mitchell talking about himself, but it's okay because it's so clever. And that's basically Mitchell in a nutshell. But are the Wachowskis doing anything anymore?
Oh, I don't know. I'm like you. I don't really, I could take or leave film these days. I don't really watch it that much.
I don't think this movie could be made anymore. Not with this kind of budget.
Yeah.
It's too weird. It's too risky.
No.
The structure is too all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm glad it did get made, though. I was opposed to the idea of adapting this novel, but they did something pretty cool with it. So
yeah, it's actually a really good example of adaptation, like adapting something and doing it well, because you understand the spirit of it and you translate it to whatever the form you're adapting it.
That's exactly right. They use the visual language of movies to do something that you could not do in a novel.
Yes.
Instead of trying to recreate the novel in movie form. So it's a great adaptation in that sense. Yeah.
It's almost like the best adaptation, like that you need to teach this in adaptation school.
Is it better than Adaptation by Charlie Kaufman?
Yes.
Okay. You're probably right. I haven't seen Adaptation since it was in theaters.
God, yeah, that was
as a high school student.
Yeah. I remember it being fun. I think I've only seen it once or twice, but
yeah, I don't want to go back to it. Let it live in my memory.
Have you read Charlie Kaufman's novel?
No.
Antkind? It's like a 700-page tome, and
oh my God,
I think it's about a weird guy.
It would be about a weird guy.
Yeah.
And he's Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
So it's an autobiography, is what you're saying?
No, it's fiction apparently.
Maybe I'll get to that one day.
Yeah, maybe. I've got it somewhere. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But did you have anything more to say about the novel or the film, Jayson?
I think we got it. I just want to thank you for giving me the impetus to revisit it, because I was sort of like, is it still my favorite novel? I'm not really sure. I don't think it is anymore, but it still holds a very, very special place in my heart. And I don't think I ever would have necessarily reread it if not for you extending the invitation. So I'm really glad you did, because, man, that Mitchell is a hell of a writer, and it made me want to go back and read. I think he's got 3. So Bone Clocks, Utopia Avenue. There's one other one, Slade House. I have not read any of those ones, and I think I'd like to do that. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on and agreeing to talk about David Mitchell. If you want people to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. So
somewhere in Japan.
Course, I'm Yokohama. Come and get me. Mangaroos podcast, spelled just the way it sounds. JaysonYoung.substack.com if you want to read my words. And that's about it. You can find me there.
Thank you, Jayson, for coming on this journey with me.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Have a good night.
You too.